Hi, everybody. I'm John Kraska, Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. Tonight is our last Library Lovers Week 2025 event. We've got some fantastic authors to close out the week with. We've been going since Tuesday with a big conversation in America about libraries, about the role libraries have in our lives and communities, on campuses and schools. Big conversations about the joy of writing, which has been just so much fun either to be a part of as your host or listening along with our other hosts, Gigi Howard from Drinks in the Library, Becky Spratford from RA for All. It's been a great week, and it's a nice way to end things tonight on Valentine's Day. I'm wearing my pink, as you all can see, making sure that we're spending a little bit of time, leaning into that love of libraries and having a big conversation about the role that they have in our lives and what it's like to be writing in America these days and reading in America these days. We've got a couple things going on with Every Library right now, and to make sure that you know where we're at, we are at everylibrary.org. We are the Political Action Committee for Libraries. We spend a lot of time working on building support for libraries and librarians. There's a lot of crises happening in this country right now around censorship and book bans, around legislative attacks on libraries. It's kind of crazy to me that the love is not as widespread as it should be. But at everylibrary.org, we're trying to get things done to build voter support, political support, social support, cultural support for these institutions that matter and the people who work there. And one way that you can help as a fan of libraries, a lover of libraries, is to throw us a little bit of money. Team, that's what it's been about all week. Partially, love of libraries. What we do to support them is all pro bono and for free. We spend a lot of time and money talking to the American public about these institutions and these people. And if you would like to donate now, and I'll put up on the screen a picture of the sticker right now. It's quite fun. It's quite lovely. You can make your choices. LibraryLoversWeek.org. Just go to LibraryLoversWeek.org and make a small donation, and we will send you a sticker, and you can put on your laptop, your notebook, your jean jacket, if you're like me from the 1980s. Okay, team, I've got some wonderful people I want to introduce you to. I'm going to bring in Chris and Fiona and Jennifer for our conversation today. I'm going to do the traditional bio reading for all three of you, and I'm going to drop off Chris and Jennifer. Fiona and I'll have a few minutes. We'll come back in with Chris. We'll come back in with Jennifer, and we'll get to talk to each other like adults too. So first off, team, I'm very happy to connect you today with Fiona Davis, New York Times bestselling author of The Stolen Queen and The Lions of Fifth Avenue. She's known for blending rich historical settings with thrilling mysteries. Her latest novel sweeps readers from the glitz of the Met Gala in 1970s New York to the ancient streets of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. I love holding up books, Fiona. This is a beautiful cover, too. Chris Bohjalian is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Jackal's Mistress, The Flight Attendant, and Midwives. Here's The Jackal's Mistress. He brings his signature depth and humanity to a Civil War love story inspired by real-life acts of bravery and compassion across enemy lines. And Jennifer Ryan, the best-selling author of The Underground Library and the Chilbury Ladies Choir, is celebrated for her heartwarming and empowering historical novels. Her latest draws on the true story of a hidden London library during the Blitz, spotlighting friendships and the transformative power of books. Folks, this will be a really interesting conversation tonight. Chris, I promise I'll bring you back in a minute. Okay? Jennifer, you too. Give me a second, but I want to hang out with Fiona for a few minutes first, okay? So, Fiona, it is nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Again, it's The Stolen Queen. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, though, before we get started? I got some big questions for you.
Sure, John. And thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here today. This is a really important cause, an important organization, and I'm happy to do anything I can to support it. Absolutely. So this is my 8th book. It's called The Stolen Queen. It's set at the Met Museum in New York City. Part of the book is set in 1978, and that's from the point of view of this very serious curator in the Egyptian art collection. And she is unwillingly teamed up with an overeager 19-year-old assistant to the Met Gala, basically her exact opposite, in order to track down a stolen artifact. And part of the book takes place in the 1930s in Egypt when the curator was a young woman. And I like to say it's about mothers and daughters, female friendship. There's hidden secrets, of course, a deadly curse, and it's a mix of glamour and mummies.
I love how you say, of course, there's a deadly curse, because it's got mummies in it. There has to be. I mean, you had to do some research, of course, on 1978 and, the Met and all that kind of stuff. And then the 1930s with Egypt. I mean, how much, how immersive in history is this book? Or is it like the city's one of the characters kind of idea?
Yeah, it's pretty immersive. I like to do a really deep dive. So for this book, in terms of 1978, it was learning what the Met Gala was like back then. It was run by this woman, Diana Vreeland, who was a tornado of a woman. And it was honoring this ballet company and a director. And it was just they had this huge exhibition of all the costumes and the sets and that kind of thing. And then Diana Vreeland had perfume infused into the room because she wanted to, have perfume so people could smell it as they went through the exhibit. So getting those details was really fun. And then in terms of Egypt in the 1930s, we traveled there. We didn't travel to the 30s, but we traveled to Egypt and just got a sense of the place, what it smells like, what the sounds are, what it tastes like, what it's like when the sand covers the sun and everything turns orange. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully when readers read the book, it feels like they're taking a trip back in time and to Egypt.
So putting together, 1978 New York, you could have gone with CBGB. You could have gone with, some sports. But why did you put those two events or those two locations together?
Well, I had actually done CBGBs in an earlier book, in The Lions of Fifth Avenue. There's a couple scenes there, so which is, you can't not do CBGBs. Mm-hmm. But for this one, the Met Museum, I was a little intimidated about choosing it as a location for a book like this, because there's just so much to it. It's enormous. There's, I think, 18 or 19 different departments, and I didn't know quite how to figure out how to get into the story. And then I read this article in the New York Times about the Met Gala of 2019, and Kim Kardashian went. She wore this bright spangly gold dress. She stood next to this bright spangly gold sarcophagus that the Met had just bought for $4 million. And the photo went viral. And the Jordanian smuggler who'd stolen that sarcophagus complained to an undercover informant that he'd never gotten paid. And that got back to the Manhattan DA's office, where they did an investigation and found the papers had been forged. And the Met was forced to return it.
I don't know this story at all. That's fascinating.
Incredible. And I just thought, what a great mix of pop culture and ancient art. Mm-hmm. And that's where I thought, okay, that's my way in.
That's amazing. So you're talking about in your description of the book, it's a story about mothers and daughters too, though. So tell us a little bit about the characters.
Yeah. So Charlotte, she's 60 years old. I'm 58, and I just wanted to have a character who is in that age range, because often they are not. And she's very serious, very educated. She does all the work of the curator, but gets none of the glory. Her boss does. And she's kind of stuck in time in many ways because of a tragedy that happened to her when she was a young woman in Egypt. And then Annie, of course, is the exact opposite. She's 19. She's not exactly qualified for the job she's doing, which is assistant to Diana Vreeland. But she kind of stumbles into this job and just wants to do the best she can. And things go terribly, terribly wrong. And I realized when I was on book tour that this book, you could describe it as a mix of Thelma and Louise meets Indiana Jones meets The Devil Wears Prada.
Oh, that's a very vivid description, and one that I think is not currently blurbed on the back. Probably should be. That's really fantastic. Yeah. And the blurbs on here on the back, since I've got it in my hand, I mean, you've got some wonderful authors who really dig what you're doing. And the one that caught my eye was it's moving, suspenseful, and entirely vivid. I mean, the settings speak for themselves in here. If you could, this might be an odd question, but you write a lot of fiction that has historical settings. Do you have a favorite period? Like if you had the magic wand, Fiona, and you could jump back, where would you go?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would love to be in the 1920s. I think there was so much going on, especially for women, where clothes were changing, social mores were changing. There was all this freedom suddenly being sought and discovered. And I think that would be incredible to be in the middle of that in the jazz age in New York City, for sure. As long as there were antibiotics and vaccines, then I would do it.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, we all made it through the Spanish flu. We might as well have some fun,
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. Well, I really appreciate you giving us this little bit of a taste of The Stolen Queen. I want to not set you off to the side, but put you in the background for a minute while I bring Chris forward, if that's all right. Thank you. Chris, let me drag you up front here. Want to chat with you a little bit, if I could, about the Jackal's Mistress. The book is set in the Civil War, and at a certain point, all guys, from what I understand, we hit a certain age, and we have to make a decision about whether it's the Civil War or World War II that we're going to be the hobbyist about. So reading this, the Civil War settings are very interesting to me. And again, that same kind of question I asked Fiona. Is it that the war is, to you, a character in the book, or is the war a setting?
First of all, John, I want to echo what Fiona said. Thank you so much for all you do on behalf of libraries and books. I've had books banned very recently, including Midwives in Florida the year before last. So the work that you do is so critical.
Thank you.
Now, John Mulaney has got this great routine about how men and fathers only read books with submarines, or no matter what you say to your father, if he's of a certain age, he will bring it back to a story about D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've written 2 novels set in the midst of World War II, Skeletons at the Feast and The Light in the Ruins. I had no expectations that I was ever going to write a novel about the Civil War. But in 2003, I wrote a magazine article for Reader's Digest about a remarkable act of heroism. A hero in the Vermont Brigade, an abolitionist lieutenant, has his leg amputated and most of one of his hands blown off in the Shenandoah Valley in 1864. And when Sheridan moves further into the valley, he's left to die. And a rebel woman whose husband is somewhere in the Union POW camp system thinks, karma. If I can keep this Yankee blue belly alive, maybe someday my husband will come back to me. So it's a novel about the North and the South, a Yankee and a rebel, an act of treason if you're a Southerner, an act of unbelievable heroism if you're a Northerner, and essentially this. How weirdly timely the story felt to me 20 years later, and my decision to write a novel about these 2 remarkable people.
That's extraordinary. The humanity of this story is right on the page. The decisions are not easy that the characters make. There's tension that's internal and intensifiers that are really external. How do you get in touch as a writer? Because we're really talking about the love of writing as well as the love of libraries this week. How do you get in touch as a writer with the emotional life of your characters like that?
Okay, I honestly don't remember whether it was Geraldine Brooks or her late husband, Tony Horowitz, who said that as a novelist, you have to understand first and foremost why your characters are doing something. What is their motivation? So for the Jackal's Mistress, I was viewing it largely as a Romeo and Juliet set in the midst of the Civil War. And the motivations of these 2 individuals range from simply hoping to live another day, the Yankee, to hoping that her true love will someday walk home to her, the rebel woman, to, as they get to know each other more and more and more, as they are essentially alone together, except for a young niece in this house, their motivations begin to change as they stop seeing each other as quite so loathsome, quite solely an enemy, and as a human being. And that's the thing about fiction. And that's why I love historical fiction and why it's different from history. History is often about the sweep of armies. Historical fiction is about the individuals within those armies, or those individuals who might not appear, for example, in Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War, when I think of a wonderful book like The Underground Library.
Mm-hmm. You are a very good guest by setting up our next one. And we got 1 or 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
I came up through a time period where Ken Burns drove a lot of awareness about Civil War history, put a lot of music to the photographs and the stories, but everything was still in black and white. Everything was still in black and white, and there's a way that black and white freezes an image in your head that is not. I mean, it feels distant. It feels abstract, and yet in The Jackal's Wife, the black and white really turns either to gray or blue for those characters, but then it turns into real true colors for those human beings. I mean, getting into a historical period, as Fiona was saying, as Jennifer will, I'm sure, be talking about too, getting into that historical period, putting yourself in that kind of context, avoiding either anachronistics or malapropistics. How's that process?
Let's talk for a brief moment about black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Ken Burns and all those photographs. The Civil War, the American Civil War, was the first time a war was chronicled with photographs. And there are two elements to this that are really interesting to me. First of all, the numbers of Civil War soldiers who would be found on the battlefield dead, clutching a photograph of a loved one that they had carried with them into battle. Secondly, people like Alexandra Gardner would have shows of the photographs of the dead bodies at places like Antietam, Bull Run, Winchester, and this was the first time that most civilians saw a battle, saw the carnage that the human being is able to inflict upon one another. So when you're writing historical fiction, when I was writing this particular novel, I was really, really cognizant of this reality. If it weren't for Ken Burns and those photos, I'm not sure most Americans in 2025 would think about the Civil War very, very much, except for if you're, I don't know, storming the Capitol and you want a rebel battle flag. I don't mean to interject politics on Valentine's night into this, but you see where I'm going.
Political Action Committee for Libraries. It's fair game there, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you see where I'm going with this. And the other thing that's really, really important about historical fiction is the way it can educate people to something they would have known nothing about. Going back to Ken Burns, how many people watching tonight have read a nonfiction book about the Civil War, the London Blitz, or the Valley of Kings, a nonfiction book in the last 10 years? And the answer, it is tiny. But books like The Underground Library bring the Blitz to life. Books like The Stolen Queen remind us both of another era in New York City, two other eras in Egypt, and The Jackal's Mistress can educate people to the Civil War and how the issues of the Civil War are being fought today in 2025.
Thank you for sharing about that. And you also took my entire closing remarks, Chris. The Jackal's Mistress, I'm going to hold this up. I want to put you into the background again, if I could, Chris, and bring forward our friend Jennifer here to talk about that Blitz that Blitz story. Jennifer, I did not. I mean, I've been to London. I've been to Churchill's bunker. You know, we've all done. Those of us who travel make a point. You know, of doing that kind of tourism. I had no idea that this was a true story until I started working through it. You know, this is a discovery for me. And I think, as Chris said, for a lot of other people. Tell us a little bit about the book and a little bit about what we would experience if we picked it up.
So when I was researching one of my other books, I'm continually researching and talking to people who were alive during the time. I think it's so important to get those primary sources, those kind of word of mouth stories, the things that people remember. And actually, I think that's when I first heard about it. Someone said, oh, well, you know about the library that went underground in the East End of London. And obviously, I thought, wow, that's quite an exciting thing to happen. I'd heard about an awful lot of other things going underground during the Blitz, but not a whole library. And that's really essentially what happened. They didn't take all the books down. I think they picked 2,000 based on what they felt was going to be of interest people underground in general. And I think this is really interesting, is how they picked those books and what they were expecting the population who were sheltering every single night during the Blitz, what they were expecting them to want, what kind of books. And the most important thing they thought was novels for escapism. They said, with so many dreadful things happening, people worried about family members on the front, people worried about people who were trapped in other situations. There was a lot of danger. There was an awful lot of sadness and a lot of grieving. And they said, this is what people want. They just want something. They just want a story that will take them away from it. The other thing that they said was because of the boredom. It alleviates boredom. There's, people are spending many hours down underground, and it's preferable that they are, quiet and relaxed and everything. So they really kind of wanted to do that. The other thing was, there was definitely this idea that they wanted to keep a kind of cultural treasure, which harks back to what you were, what some of your previous weeks have been about, and censorship. There was an awful lot of censorship going on through Europe, but it never hit the UK at all. And fortunately, but at that point in the Blitz, there was an awful lot of expectation that that Britain was going to get invaded. And so I think there was a bit of a preparation being set up for that as well. And this kind of like consolidation of where are these treasures? Where are these books? Are they out there? Can we read them now? Can we share them and everything? And in fact, in the book, there's a wonderful part. One of the main characters is a Jewish refugee from Berlin who witnessed some of the book burnings. And she came over and she found books there that she had not seen in print, and had to be destroyed in everyone's private libraries as well at home. She hadn't seen any of them since she was a child. So it's all of these things. But I think the most important thing that I think that they wanted to preserve was this sense of community. And it's I don't know what everyone else feels when they walk into a library, but when I walk in, I see a community. I see a place where everybody is all just sitting down or browsing or quietly chatting or in a meeting, a small meeting room, all there because of the books and because of reading. It's like a building that is dedicated to reading and, in every form. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, carrying on from that, I would like to say thank you so much for having me here today and for everything you do, all the very important work. Thank you.
No, thank you. You're very kind. And it's a great story. The fact that it's a true story, really, raised my eyebrows. The Blitz as a time of both devastation, but also in that cultural narrative of resilience, the carry on, as it were. But the individual characters in this book who are inspired by a true story, the courage and the kindness of those human beings with each other in this time of great trial. Did you model those characters on real people, or were you inspired by them, as it were?
So yes, so one of the characters is definitely based on one of the librarians who was there, who was part of the exercise of, because it all came from the librarians themselves. It was their idea. They had to fight the council in order to talk the council into letting them do it.
And you know what? That's the craziest part of that story, I gotta say. Like that,
yes.
Of course, the city council, council, as you say in the UK, is going to be like, well, that's our stuff. We're not going to just.
That's right. People are going to walk off with the books, and yeah. They did say that quite a few books went missing, but they said that the main reason for that was because of the bombs, actually. That people would leave them in their houses, and then the houses would get bombed. And so inevitably books would go missing. But yeah, so one of the characters is very much based on one of the librarians. You know, in general, I've read so much about the women of the era and some of the other interesting situations that they find themselves in wartime, in the Second World War, that, you know, it was in a way a couple of those women in their situations that I used for the other characters. Yeah, so Juliet's the main character. She's been brought in as an assistant head librarian, the deputy head. And this is a big moment for women during the Second World War, was that they were allowed to step into these sorts of more management roles. They would never have had the opportunity before. And so she was kind of taking advantage of it. She was an absolute huge advocate for libraries. This was her life work. She, you know, so there she was, and it gets bombed, I think, the second week that she's there. And she's there thinking, I can't believe I've just got this incredible position and it's incredible opportunity. And that was half the reason why she drove, but also even by then she really understood the crucial need. If anyone needed a library at any point in time in history, I think it was then. So that's the main character. The second character is a younger woman who is just about to head to college, but I won't talk too much about her because it's a bit of a spoiler. And the third character, as I mentioned, is a refugee from Berlin.
And I got to tell you, Jennifer, that perspective of having folks who have been reading the news, and folks, and that character who's been living the news as and then coming as a refugee, I thought that created a tremendous conversation amongst those people in this book.
Yes, well, thank you. Yes, I think so. I think it was just incredible. I read an awful lot about, and I read already about a lot of the refugees that came over. And I was lucky enough to not speak to them in person, but speak to some of their relatives who were able to tell me a little bit more in depth about what they went through and how they felt about it. And one of the stories from that I actually put into the book itself, which was about Sophie, the main character, as she's young. She's I think 19 years old. As she was coming through Germany and got to the border, just before they reached the border, which was a bit tricky to get through, and she left Germany just before the war proper began. It was 1938, and she managed to get this visa that was basically her exit route. And so they get to the border, and she's in this carriage with a group of nuns. And suddenly this guard comes around and says, everyone's got to show the papers, their papers. And so she goes to show her papers, but the nuns, but she realizes that anyone who's Jewish is being taken off the train and marched in a different direction. And the nun beside her puts her scarf over her head and hands her a Bible and basically says, "Oh, she's with us," so that she doesn't have to show her papers after all. And that absolutely saves her, really, absolutely saves her from, whatever horrors might have faced her otherwise. That is based completely on a true story, and I love this when you find these amazing stories and you can, share them with the readers, with everybody else, in this way through fiction. Exactly what Chris said. It's an incredible way to really share what all these hidden stories in history.
Thank you for that. Again, folks, the Underground Library. I want to bring back in our colleagues and wrap up for 3, 4, 5 minutes with each other if we could. Jennifer, Fiona, Chris, I need to do my commercial though first. I'm sorry. I mentioned in the green room beforehand that I would be doing the commercial for libraryloversweek.org. If you've watched anything else this week, you'll know that we've been hyping libraryloversweek.org. A donation of $3 or more gets you a lovely sticker. I'm going to put it on the screen now. The lovely stickers, I should say, and the chance to be able to support what I hope is good work, what I know is to be good work, supporting libraries. We all have a library story, folks, I'm sure. My library story is a little bit about being a kid, latchkey kid, going to the library after school, you know. Also a librarian story. You know, my high school librarian she didn't teach me how to read, she taught me how to think. She kept sneaking me books, you know. I'm fascinated by whether or not you've got a library or a librarian story to share too. And Fiona, you've been in the green room for a little while. Do you want to go first?
Oh, I'd be happy to. So when I was a kid, we moved around a lot. And the one place we'd always go the minute we got to a new city was the library. And so that was the one thing that was consistent. I knew what to expect there. I knew what I could get. And I just came from a family of avid readers. But my real librarian/library story happened a lot later. When I was working on my book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which is set at the New York Public Library. That's the big one on Fifth Avenue. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough to get a seat in a room where if you have a book contract, you can work there. And you get all the...
Wait, you got to get a book contract? You can work there?
Yeah, it's called the Allen Room. It's fantastic. And it's very quiet. And they'll bring you whatever books you need. And so I was working on this book about the library in the library. Mm-hmm. And at one point in the manuscript, I had a question because there was a dead body in the manuscript. It's not there now. I kind of, edited things around and it left. But at that point, I had this dead body, and I reached out to one of the librarians who'd been so helpful. And I said, if you had to hide a dead body in the New York Public Library, where would you put it?
Oh, my goodness.
She wrote back right away, down in the basement over here. Sent me a floor plan, completely unfazed. And to me, that's what librarians are all about, getting you the info you need. And so I just love that. To me, that was... She was just incredible in every way.
That's really great. And the fact that she had a spot already picked out, I'm sure staff meetings are just a thrill there after that, Chris, you want to? Oh, Chris, I apologize. I didn't put your crawl or your connect with Chris up when we were talking. I was just too into the conversation. And then I remembered suddenly for Jennifer, and I did it properly. Chris, tell me about your library story or your library.
First of all, Fiona said the best thing I have ever heard on any panel ever. There was a dead body in the manuscript. That is one hell of a big book. Mm-hmm. Anyway, like Fiona, I moved around a ton as a kid. At one point, I went to 5 schools in 6 years in 3 states. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, just before I started 8th grade, my family moved from a suburb of New York City to Miami, Florida. And we moved there the Friday of Labor Day weekend. The following Tuesday, I started school at Palm Springs Junior High. And right after school, I went to see my new orthodontist, a sadist. It would turn out, if ever there was one, he gave me this orthodontic headgear that looked like the business end of a backhoe, and I had to wear it for 4 hours a day. So every day after school, I would put in my headgear and I would go to the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library, and I would read all the books that an 8th grade boy in the mid to late 1970s would read. I read William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist and Peter Benchley's Jaws. And for the first time, I read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Joyce Carol Oates's Expensive People, which begins with the words, "I was a child murderer." Great sentence. Not as good as I had a dead body in the manuscript, but very good. In any case, I learned so much from those books from Blatty and Benchley and Harper Lee and Joyce Carol Oates. And to this day, I credit the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library with the reason I get to do this for a living.
Love it. That's fantastic. And as a fellow headgear victim, myself, thank you for the flashback, Chris. That's really very kind of you. So,
I triggered you. I should have given you a trigger warning. Orthodontia coming up.
Yeah. Jennifer, we've been talking about libraries, for a few minutes now. This historical connection to it, but what's the personal connection for you?
Well, you just like everybody else, I've got all these amazing, just memories from very, very young. And my mother was a really avid reader. So it was almost like a babysitter really for us. We were taken there, like deposited in the children's section, and that was that. Don't bother her for another hour, and we were more than happy to be there. But I always remember, I think the big moment for me personally was we lived just outside of London. And one day we went up to London and we went into the British Museum. The British Library it's not anymore, but it used to be in this huge dome structure right in the middle of the British Library. And it was just stacked with books, and it was almost like cathedral-like in the height and the glass dome at the top. And it was just the most amazing building, being inside a building like that. And it was just covered with books. I mean, you just couldn't cram any more in. Mm-hmm. And I just remember being just overwhelmed by the power, I think, of, this edifice like given to reading. Yes, as soon as I was an adult, and living in London, I made sure that I became a member so I could go there all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've been to the current British Library, and it is a profound visit. The reading room at New York Public, I've only seen it as a tourist. And we actually helped the Miami-Dade County Library keep its funding. Back in 2014, there was a big fight over it, and I'm proud to have raised their taxes.
John, thank you. I mean, spending money on libraries is an incredibly important use of taxpayer dollars. A library is far more than a room full of books. It remains one of the last multi-generational community centers in any community. You've got children's story hours. You've got teen kids doing projects together. You've got adults and kids browsing for books. And you've got so much programming for seniors, the middle-aged, teenagers. It's just extraordinary.
In both the U.S. and the UK, I don't know what we need more right now of than places for real community connections again. And for that level playing field about information access, sure. But, the reading for the joy of it, the reading for the joy of it. And it sounds like each of you as writers came to your joy of writing through that joy of reading. And without that small d democratic institution to do it, I don't know how it gets done for a lot of people. Yep. You folks have been absolutely wonderful tonight. Thank you for helping me capstone quite a week of good conversations about that joy of writing, that culture of reading. Library Lovers Week team, it's been a lot of fun. If you do have $3, we will send stickers, and put it to good work. It's been a nice Valentine's evening sharing it with all three of you. Thank you so very kindly to be part of it.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Fiona. Hey, Fiona, and I will see you on the road.
Love it.